Okay, I think we should be good there as well.
Perfect. So, hi everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Alors, je sais pas, j'ai manqué un peu l'introduction, alors je sais pas si Jennifer avait déjà introduit un peu le sujet ou non, mais aujourd'hui, on fait une présentation sur comment préparer une présentation pour une conférence. Et le plan, ça va être comme passer, I guess we can go to the next slide.
Okay.
So, this will be so the plan today is we're going to go over the standard format of conference presentations, and this applies to both posters and oral presentations, depending on which one you're preparing. I think if you're presenting at Intercom, it's majority going to be oral presentations, but what we're going to show you today applies to the posters as well. And then next, we'll go through the kind of specific sections and content. And then we'll kind of go over some general advice and how to prepare. And then I'm going to actually give you some practical tips. A lot of it is surrounding how to use PowerPoint, which is a personal passion of mine. I love PowerPoint. And then finally, we do have some resources and examples for you that you can leave with to help you prepare your presentations. So I'm going to flip back and forth between French and English, but obviously the questions can be in any language. I apologize to our Francophone friends. These slides were not proofread by a real Francophone, so you're going to get what you get, and I'm sorry. But yeah, so let's go. OK. Alors, l'objectif d'une présentation lors d'une conférence, c'est, la première objectif vraiment, c'est de résumer et partager vos recherches. Alors, souvent, quand on fait de la recherche, on veut partager les résultats et la conférence sert à une façon rapide et efficace de voir plusieurs résultats en même temps. Alors, vraiment, le but, c'est de communiquer aux gens qui assistent à la présentation qu'est-ce que vous avez fait et qu'est-ce que vous avez trouvé comme résultat. So, ensuite, it's also a good opportunity to get feedback, especially if you're presenting a proposal. So if you don't have results to present or you do have results to present and you're talking about next steps, it's a great way to get a lot of different people that you wouldn't normally get feedback from in the same place to give you some ideas or ask critical questions that maybe you hadn't thought of. And then finally, it is a great opportunity to network and meet others. And I think I had one more here, as well as generate new ideas. So that is kind of the purpose. And conference presentations have a pretty standard format. So if we go to the next slide.
Meredith,
Yes.
as well, a virtual conference, which is what Intercom is going to be
Yes.
In January, is still a great opportunity to network and meet other people.
Definitely.
Even though you're not able to do so in person, the chat boxes at most conferences function as a great place to share information. And I'd also recommend that you tilt your phone a little bit. We can only see your chin down.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I can't see myself, so even better. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, guys, there's a whole slide on this on how to not let this happen. So I'm basically not practicing what I preach. So anyway, OK, so les sections clés d'une présentation de conférence incluent un page titre ou juste le titre avec les informations que je vais vous donner tantôt. Un résumé du contexte de votre recherche. Ensuite, la méthodologie et les procédures que vous avez suivies lors de votre étude, vos résultats. Ensuite, une discussion des résultats et peut-être des limites de votre recherche et des idées pour des projets à venir. Et finalement, des remerciements. Alors, we're going to go through each section shortly. But first, just to give you an idea of what those sections look like on a timeline in a presentation. So if this is an oral presentation and you've been given 15 minutes, typically you want to prepare 10 to 12 minutes of oral presentation to leave 3 to 5 minutes for discussion and questions at the end. So the way you would ideally kind of split this up is you'd spend about 30 seconds on your title page doing a little introduction of kind of who you are and where you're from. And then you'd spend about 1 to 2 minutes on the research background. So this is actually something where a lot of people really feel like they have to spend a lot of time to contextualize it. And a common error is to spend too much time there, but it needs to be tight and like efficient. So 1 to 2 minutes. Then about 1 to 2 minutes on your methods. So that's where we'll go in detail about what's in that section. But again, this you can end up being in a position where you spend too much time here, and then the back end of the presentation ends up being condensed. So then you would go into your results. And like I said, the goal really is to share what you found and help kind of educate people and show them what's new. So this is really where the meat of your presentation is. And then finally, there's the discussion, which kind of wraps it up and talks about how this links to other things and what's next. And then finally, you have about 30 seconds again where you say thank you. So overall, that should, if you follow that format, you'll kind of hit all the main topics, and it'll also work out to being about 10 to 12 minutes of speaking, which leaves enough time for you to get a few questions. So what I mentioned that the poster shares the same format. So if you were to take those same sections and put them on a poster, the format of your poster, if it's in person, could be either landscape or portrait, and you can see how the sections sort of move around. But they kind of follow the same guideline, like the bigger, make sure the results are very clear and like a big piece of it. But you see that you still have the title and the thank yous. And if you want to include references, you can put them with the thank yous, but it's not necessary to have references for conference presentations, whether they're oral or posters. And then with your poster presentation, and this is especially relevant if you're preparing an online poster. So the online poster would have more of a landscape format. And in this case, you want to have kind of an elevator pitch prepared about your poster. So typically, if this is a live conference, people would be walking around, and a lot of people are just going to walk right by your poster. But if someone does stop, you want to have like a really concise kind of pitch about your poster, and kind of, about a minute long. So typically, a sentence about the context, a couple of sentences about the methods, a couple of sentences about the results, and then kind of one sentence to kind of conclude all of it. And that's something you should really kind of come prepared with, so that if people do stop by, you're efficient and engaging, and can kind of convey the information quickly. So are there any questions so far?
And again, feel free to use the chat, or feel free to unmute your mic and ask your questions out loud. Alors, vous pouvez poser vos questions dans le chat, ou autrement, vous pouvez poser vos questions à haute voix.
All right, we're good. OK, alors maintenant, on va passer à travers de chaque section pour parler un peu des détails qu'on veut inclure. Alors, si on commence par juste la page titre ou le titre, si c'est un poster, on doit inclure premièrement votre nom et c'est ça, what's happening? Nom. OK, votre nom, le titre aussi, j'ai oublié de le mentionner, mais c'est comme dans le titre du diapo. Vos co-auteurs. Alors, si c'est un projet relié à votre thèse, c'est certain que votre superviseur est un de vos co-auteurs. Et dépendamment de votre situation ou contexte, ça se peut aussi que les membres de votre comité sont des co-auteurs aussi. Et si vous n'êtes pas certain, c'est une bonne question pour votre superviseur. Mais autant que vous n'êtes pas prof régulier, vous ne pouvez pas techniquement présenter des recherches ou des projets de recherche sans l'approbation ou l'appui d'un superviseur. So, il faut absolument que leur nom soit inclus sur la page web aussi. Page web, sur la page, le diapo ou l'affiche. Vos affiliations, alors ça parle des universités, mais aussi si vous avez travaillé avec une organisation spécifique pour faire votre recherche, il faut aussi inclure ces affiliations-là et tous les logos appropriés. So, any questions on this one?
I think I have one, Meredith, to kind of launch us off. What you're presenting is for, I would say, more formal conferences. Is that correct?
Yes, but it's a good habit to do it in everything, because I'll say on my end, going back and looking at slides after, if you have this title page, you know what it's from. So it serves as a good reminder and like kind of a good timestamp of what this is. Okay. And it's a good way to keep track of it. So I would agree that it's definitely required at a formal conference. I'm not sure how formal Intercom is.
And I know Eliza, our VP academic, is online and perhaps can speak to this, but I would say in a preliminary fashion, it's much more informal than what you're presenting. But these are good practices to keep in mind. Yeah.
So are there any other questions? Okay. But
Actually,
anyway,
I have another one. What if you're presenting
yes.
something that your supervisor didn't help you with? So I
Okay.
have several projects on the go that I've kind of facilitated on my own. Can I omit certain information? Is this scalable? Is that appropriate?
Yeah, if depends on, I'd say, did you work with someone else?
No.
Okay, then I'd say it's fine. So, you could. I'd say like a big conference, it might look a little bit odd, but I would say at an informal conference, you're fine.
Okay. And Eliza has said that we're informal, but if we want to be formal to get practice, that intercom that's one of the objectives of our intercom conference that's coming up in January.
Okay. But if anyone is participating in an honors thesis project or something kind of more formal, they're expecting the formal version. Okay. All right. Oh yeah. And then the details of the conference. So kind of date, time. So this is what I meant by that date. It does give you an opportunity to kind of have this like archived version of the different presentations you've done and where you've been. So it's a good way to kind of keep tabs on things for your CV and for later on when you're trying to kind of just tie together your experience. If you just have a bunch of informal ones, you might not remember where you presented it or whatever. So if you can get in the habit of having like a really clear title page, then it sort of sorts itself out. Okay. All right. So then in the background section, here you want to include a brief overview of the research context. So you want to include enough information that you're not telling people, kind of the average person in the audience, what they already know, but enough to guide people towards your specific research questions and objectives. So you want to have a brief overview of the research context. And then if there is a theoretical background that's applicable to what you're presenting, you definitely want to give an overview of only the parts that are relevant to what you're doing. So you don't need to go into kind of a full background of this whole theory, but really focus on kind of what's relevant to your study. You want to, again, so just essential information only. Then you want to lead into the rationale for your plan study. So why is it that you did this study? And then have that lead into the actual objectives and research question of your project. So just a kind of one key thing to note here, if you have any kind of terms or definitions that you're going to be using in your methods or your results, you want to make sure that you've already operationalized them in this background section. So you shouldn't have participants watching your presentation and get to your results and see sort of new words or things they hadn't already been introduced. You want to make sure you cover your bases in the background section. So
Meredith,
any questions here?
Yeah, can you expand on what you mean by the rationale for plan study? So is it like, I was required to do this as part of my thesis?
I would say that even if that's the truth, you should try to come up with something better. But more like, what is the like problematic? Why do we need to redo, here's the research as it is in your field, here's the problem, and then why are you doing your study to kind of address that problem? It's to just sort of justify it, kind of why you even did this work. And if the only reason is because you had to satisfy a program requirement, then try to come up with something that sounds a little bit more legit than that. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So Eliza said,
Yeah.
like, where is the gap and how you're filling it? Exactly. So that might be a better way to write it out than rationale for a plan study. But like, why should anyone care about this? And why did you invest 1 to 7 years on this project? So that's kind of the main piece. Okay. Any other questions?
No, not yet. There's no hands up or anything.
Okay. All right. Okay, so in the methods, il faut inclure comment votre étude, une description de comment votre étude et la méthodologie que vous avez choisie va vous permettre de répondre, I noticed there's a typo in there, sorry, répondre à vos objectifs. Il faut aussi expliquer toutes les procédures que vous avez suivies. Alors, quoi exactement est-ce que vous avez fait? Est-ce que vous avez fait une recension de la littérature sur un domaine? Si oui, quels étaient les termes que vous avez utilisés pour faire votre recherche? Comment est-ce que vous avez trié les articles, etc. Si c'est une étude avec des personnes, alors combien de personnes est-ce que vous avez passé en entrevue? Comment est-ce que vous les avez recrutées? C'était quoi les critères d'inclusion, etc. Ensuite, on a les caractéristiques de l'échantillon. Alors, finalement, après que vous avez fait votre recrutement et vous avez trouvé les personnes ou les données que vous étudiez, quelles sont les caractéristiques de cet échantillon? Alors, est-ce que c'est des étudiants? Est-ce que c'est des familles? Est-ce que c'est des utilisateurs de Reddit? Je ne sais pas. Mais décrivez c'est qui, ils ont quel âge, etc. Ensuite, il faut pas, cette section-là, la plan d'analyse, c'est optionnel parce que pour sauver du temps, on peut simplement l'expliquer en même temps qu'on présente les résultats. Mais c'est une bonne habitude de présenter votre plan pour comment vous allez analyser vos données et lier le plan à vos questions de recherche ou vos objectifs de votre étude. So that kind of covers the methods. Were there any questions there? Okay. And then the results. In this section, you want to include the most important findings. So this might, as you get further along in your studies or as your studies get more and more complex, you might find that there's a lot that you want to present and it's impossible to summarize everything in a 10 to 12 minute presentation. So in that case, you really want to kind of highlight the main findings. And that's why if we weren't in a pandemic, you'd probably be presenting, if, for example, this is a master's thesis, you might actually be able to present your findings at a few different conferences and highlight different components depending on the conference. So don't feel pressure to present everything because if you just overwhelm people, they're not going to remember it anyway. So kind of focused, stick to whatever you presented as the objective of your study and that main research question, or if you have a couple of them, and just stick to the results that support that. And the rest of it, don't worry about it. It won't fit and you'll just make it crazy if you try to do that. And then you can call this section preliminary results if it's early stages. So if you've just started your analyses and that's what part you're at, you can present a few kind of quick results and then talk about what you're still going to do. And that's also totally acceptable. And then I think that was it, or it might be another one.
That was it. That was it.
Okay, perfect. And then I saw a question pop up. I didn't see it.
Yes, Louise has asked, how about theoretical papers or presentations? What would be the key components?
So a theoretical presentation so I do talk about what to do if you don't have results in that one. So I would say the theoretical one will follow more the format of a proposal presentation, which I'm going to show you shortly. So we'll come back to that question. Okay, and then finally, your discussion, you want to include an interpretation of your findings, but you want to be careful not to just simply repeat what you already presented in your results. So that's a habit that's actually pretty hard to break because it's pretty easy just to provide kind of like layperson summaries of exactly what you already said. But at this point, this is your opportunity to kind of go beyond that and talk about, okay, well, what do these results mean? Like what did we actually learn from this study? And focus less on the kind of technical information that was presented in the results section. You also want to link back, so circle back to how you met the study objectives, or you didn't. It's okay if you didn't. So you're allowed to highlight that there. You're also allowed to critique your work, and this is important because you don't want to go and like completely crap all over it. But it is important to show that your work does have limitations and that you're aware of them, and that might interpret or change the interpretation of the findings or impact the generalizability or whatever. So it's important just to kind of highlight that. And then you can talk about your conclusions and or next steps. So kind of like, this is kind of the overall conclusion and this is what I'm doing next. This is a good way to plug, if you are doing more research, it's a good way to plug kind of what you're doing to get people excited or hyped up about, all the cool stuff you're doing. And then finally, this might depend on the conference, but some conferences do ask you to kind of, in your conclusion, make like a specific recommendation or do something kind of specific to kind of tie in the theme of the conference. So if that's the case, you would want to include that here. So if they've asked you to make practical recommendations or like policy recommendations or something like that, that is where you would tie it in here in the discussion. So, and then finally, our acknowledgements. This is where you will thank again your supervisor or your co-authors. If you have funding for your project, very important. So that could include, you know, if you have SHRC, OGS, or if you're working on something that your supervisor has funding for, you should acknowledge it then. And then you should provide your contact information. So whatever you want, it's becoming increasingly common to put kind of your name, your email, and your social media handles so people can get in touch with you easily if they want. And then finally, actually the words thank you or merci. So that covers the acknowledgement. And so what if I don't have results? So theoretical papers don't necessarily have results. They're kind of providing an overview of or a critique of an existing theory, a proposal. So I think many people will be presenting proposals at Intercom next week. You also won't have results. And the format pretty much changes, stays the same. All those same components are there, except their weight or what's in them changes a bit. So the background does not change, but the methods, you would focus on plan methods, approvals, recruitment, ethics, what you plan to do, and how you plan to analyze your data. Results, you would talk about anticipated and hypothesized results, so what you're kind of expecting to see. And then your discussion, you would talk about the expected contributions and anticipated challenges. If this were a theoretical paper, these sections would be a lot smaller and you would really just have a very big background section. And in the methods, you would talk about your kind of like the ways a theory can be used or the way it can be applied or how it should be used. And then the results and discussion would be sort of collapsed into one and talking about kind of future steps and where things should go from there. If you're doing a 15-minute presentation on a proposal, you'll see that the weights of the sections change and that you spend a lot more time on the context background and the methods, and then way less time on the results and discussion. And that just is because you don't actually have results or anything yet. If this were a theoretical paper, I would make even the context and methods even bigger, and then really just sort of shorten that last piece at the end. In terms of the poster, you'll see again that the context and methods take up most of the poster and the results and discussions are much smaller. So that's sort of how you would change the weight there. Any questions?
I have one if nobody else does, but I've asked quite a few already.
Yes, please, I heard one. Oui?
Yes, I have a question. Thank you for the presentation, Meredith. I would like you to speak more to this poster format because I'm still confused what it's really all about.
The poster? So I have some examples that we'll show you guys shortly. But a poster is kind of like a static slide, like it's one giant slide that allows you to present all the information that you would normally present in a 15-minute presentation in one giant visual. So if this were in person, your poster would probably be about 3 feet by 4 feet, so it's very big. But if it's an online poster, it's one PowerPoint slide. And you want to convey as much information as clearly and like efficiently as possible, but you only get one slide.
So could we say that the poster is like the outline of your presentation? You know, most times when we are doing presentation, we give like an outline, normal presentation. Could we say that this poster replaces outline for presentation?
I would
because
say
in the outline you list.
Outline. Yeah,
no, in the outline you list.
But sorry, go ahead.
You know, in presentations, you kind of some call it agenda, some call it outline. So I want to understand if this poster with the description you've given is like a visual format of an agenda or an outline for the presentation.
It is, but it still has content in it. So I think we'll show you some examples and I think it'll make more sense. If you've never seen one before, I can appreciate that this looks really crazy. And I'm sorry, I should have included examples sooner in the slides. How about after I show you examples, come back. If it's still not clear, let me know and we can talk about it more then.
All right, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Any other questions?
Well, I think maybe before we move on, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, Meredith, but there's different types of conference presentations. And so this might also help to clarify the question that Linda was asking. Sometimes
Yes.
conferences will require presentations, and some will have poster sessions, which take the place of a formal oral presentation. Oftentimes, and I've seen these at student conferences as well as like conferences, usually during a poster presentation session, you'll have anywhere between 4, which is how many we had last year at our intercom conference, to I've seen conferences that have 20 or 30 posters. And so it's a great way as a conference organizer to allow for more people to present their research in a short span of time. So it's an alternative format, but it would be very clearly outlined in a call for conference submissions, whether they take posters or just oral presentations. That wasn't a question though.
That was your and answer. It's like a science fair. Yeah, it is like a science fair. It's also usually, or not usually, but oftentimes the poster session will coincide with like a happy hour or something else, so people can mingle and have snacks while they walk around and look at the posters. So it's viewed as more of like a social kind of engagement thing and less of like a formal presentation. But the content of the poster is still pretty formal, and we have hundreds of examples to show you so we'll get there very soon. Okay, all right, so just some general advice, des conseils. Alors, quand vous créez votre présentation affiche, la première chose que je vous recommande, c'est de faire un plan de votre présentation. Normalement, on a peut-être l'intuition de juste commencer à créer nos diapos, mais sans avoir comme un plan ou une idée de qu'est-ce qu'on doit préparer, c'est pas nécessairement facile de juste commencer avec les diapos, et on peut perdre beaucoup de temps juste comme être bloqué au début. Alors, je vous encourage de faire un plan, so like an outline, ensuite de commencer à créer vos diapos à partir du outline. I really recommend that you select a slide template, and then you can add your outline to that template and then start filling it in. I find that helps kind of make sure that your slides are coherent, but also that all the pieces are in there and that it kind of fits. And then you can kind of step back and see what it looks like before you've really put a lot of time into making the slides good. Then you can dive in. Quand vous révisez vos diapos, identifiez tout ce qui peut être expliqué avec une image ou un chiffre afin de réduire les mots sur votre page. So in general, when people are watching a presentation, they're going to read what is on the slide first before they listen to you. So you can keep people focused and following on you by reducing the word count so that people don't have to read your slides. But also there are strategies for, and I'll talk about that shortly, about timing animations so that people are really following along and listening to what you're saying. So anything that you can do to reduce the word count on the slides is important. I realize these are really bad examples of that, but that's also because I'm trying to convey 2 languages worth of information. And then next, if this is your style to want to read, I would recommend writing out a transcript with your slides, and then kind of go through that and identify what's missing or seems unnatural. If it's not your style to do a transcript, or you don't read, then this is actually a bit of a step you can probably skip. But yeah, make a bit of a transcript to practice, but then you'll want to practice enough that you don't actually need to read it anymore. And then the next one is just for presentations. So this doesn't apply to posters as much. So if you find, wow, sorry, I have so many typos in the French, I'm sorry. If you find that you're reading verbatim some of the stuff on your slides, then you need to change that so that you aren't reading it. So if you find as you practice your presentation that there's a specific slide where you end up saying exactly what's on the slides, then if you either need to change what you're saying or change what's on the slide, okay, because that becomes really redundant and people will stop paying attention. Number 6 is vous pouvez ajouter des animations qui soutiennent l'ordre des idées que vous présentez. Alors, si par exemple, comme sur ces diapos-là, au lieu de présenter tous les points en même temps, on les affiche en ordre en même temps que je les introduise pour que vous me suiviez au lieu de juste lire les points. Ensuite, we have, this is the kind of the golden rule, and something I wish I'd done more of in grad school is practice as much as you can with different audiences and ask them to identify areas where you struggle to make suggestions for improvements. So I know for me in grad school, I didn't really have a good setup in my lab where we practiced. We didn't really practice presentations as a group, but in my postdoc, we were really good at doing that. Our supervisor would set up a practice time, and it really just made the quality of everyone's presentations go up a lot. And just by practicing and rehearsing, you can get to the point where you're conveying 20 minutes of information into 10. And it's really efficient and it's easy for people to follow, and the quality is really strong. So merci, Dominique. I'll take your offer. So I don't know if she sent that to everyone or just me. Okay.
I think just you. Yeah.
Oh, just me. She offered to fix my French. Thank you. Perfect. OK. J'ai aussi des conseils pour des conférences en ligne. Et vous allez voir qu'une des choses que je recommande de faire, je ne l'ai pas faite aujourd'hui et j'ai eu des problèmes techniques. So first one is to practice at least once with the technology. So the beauty of things being online is that you have the opportunity to kind of set up your space and do a dry run exactly how it'll be on presentation day and make sure that things don't break or nothing goes wrong. You have the added bonus of being able to actually record your presentation and review it. So it might feel like you're going to die inside watching it and you might be cringing, but at least it'll let you kind of see things that you wouldn't normally get to see in your presentation style if it was in person. So it's a great kind of unique learning tool that's available to us right now. So I'd highly recommend you try a little bit, even if you feel like you want to die. Next is tester votre configuration de microphone et d'arrière-plan avec un ami. Alors, ça, c'est pour assurer qu'il n'y a pas de feedback quand vous parlez, que la connexion est bonne, etc., qu'il n'y a pas de distraction en arrière de vous, etc. Next is make sure someone has a copy of your slides in case you have to call in. So I don't know what happened, but I downloaded the new version of Microsoft iOS and I realized that today was the first time I tried to use Zoom and it's not working. So luckily, Jen already had a copy of the slides, but I didn't actually have the information to call in, which is the next thing. So that was part of our delay at the beginning of the meeting today, was trying to get organized on that front. So here's proof today that this can happen at any time. So make sure for your conference presentation, you have a plan. And then this last one is really hard because your screen, so if you were live in person, you would be facing the audience and you would have your slides kind of next to you. But on your computer, your slides are probably in front of you and your camera is probably somewhere else. So if you can get to the point that you're rehearsed enough with your slides that you can look at the camera and not the slides, that will go a long way for the participants' experience. But it's really hard to do. So any questions about this?
I have another maybe tip to add as well, which is I think that the virtual environment is really great for conference presentations, especially for first-time conference presentations, or if you're presenting a specific research project for the first time and you're not as familiar with it as you are something that you've worked on. I invested in a second monitor. And it's portable, it folds up, and I use it for teaching as well. And it's great because I can have it kind of behind my computer. And so I can have my notes on one screen and my slides on the other. And that allows for the camera piece that Meredith was just talking about. And I know, Meredith, you're going to get into some more practical tips in a moment. I also use Google Slides instead of PowerPoint because I find it's easier to keep my notes on my screen. So if my second screen does fail, which it does occasionally for the same reason that Zoom wasn't working today, at least I find with Google Slides, my notes don't show up in my my videos, whereas I find with PowerPoint, my notes sometimes do. So that if you have time to experiment with different things, I would definitely recommend that.
Perfect. Any other questions, comments, or tips that anyone has to share? Okay. All right. So now we have some practical tips, conseils pratiques. So I guess just to kind of say, these apply to, you can do everything that we're showing here in PowerPoint. You can do it in Google Slides as well. I personally, the opposite of Jan, I love PowerPoint, so I'm biased. So I actually like hate Google Slides, but I think they're pretty much the same now at this point. And same with, oh my gosh, what is the Apple version?
Is it Keynote?
Keynote, that's it. Yes. So basically any of those three will let you put together either a poster or a presentation. If you are like a very experienced, or if you have experience with something like Adobe Illustrator, you can also make your poster there. But what I'm showing you are just ways to do it kind of with something simple that's open, like free to us as students, etc. So first thing is your poster is actually a giant slide. So I know Linda had asked about having an example of a poster. So if we go to the next slide here, so that is a poster. The text on the poster looks a little bit weird because I had not downloaded the new fonts, the fonts I used onto this computer, but that is an example of a conference poster. And as you can see, it's just a giant PowerPoint slide. And the way you create it is you go into page setup, and then you can actually change the size of your PowerPoint slide to fit the dimensions of whatever the poster needs to be. So if it's 3 feet by 4 feet, then you would make it 90 centimeters by 120 centimeters. And what it'll do is just actually create this giant canvas that you can then edit like you would any PowerPoint slide. So just to give you an idea here, so this is what this actually looked like. So the boxes are just different shapes and forms. I'd installed custom fonts. So I had Oswald and Mooley. So Oswald was the heading font and Mooley was the text one. I should have put the link here, but if you're interested in fonts and different types of typography, there's a lot of different style websites that can make recommendations on which types of fonts go together. The people that you see were from free people vectors, basically.com. So if you want to include icons or things to illustrate some of your findings, you can. All of the icons, so like the symbols, like the heart, the thumbs up, the light bulb, those are all part of different icon PowerPoint libraries. So if you just search icon PowerPoint library, you'll find tons of open source of options. And then if when you're done making your poster, you would save it as a PDF for printing or even sharing, as that will preserve all of the setting and formatting you did. And if you are interested in very kind of specialized design and like want to get really nitty gritty with your PowerPoints, I'd recommend saving them as a PowerPoint show for when you are going to present, because then it ensures that everybody has the same, or if you open it on a different computer, it'll look the same as it does on your computer. Whereas if I were to send you a file that has some kind of custom things in it and you don't have those installed on your computer, it wouldn't show exactly the same. I can see a bunch of comments coming up. Is there anything I need to answer?
No, just people are offering tips. So Louisa's talking about
cool.
how PowerPoint now has a variety of vector pictures and icons.
Yes.
And I was sharing that there's also some templates that are offered through the university. And if you're going to have an in-person poster printed either on campus, which is quite expensive, or off campus,
yes,
other places, there's templates that you can use to also help with this if your skill set is lower than Meredith's and you don't really know how to organize some of these things. And I used one of the templates last year for my in-person poster, and it was very easy.
Okay. Do you want to share the link to those?
Yeah, I'll dig them up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So this is here. Oh yes. So yeah, if you want to make sure that your PowerPoint presentation will always look the same when you play it on other computers, you could just have to save it as a different type of file. It's a PPSX instead of PPX. And then it means you can't edit it on the other computer, but it'll also preserve everything as you want it to look. I don't know what the equivalent is in Google. So I hear us talking about using a PowerPoint template. So I guess we'll add to this recommendation that there are also poster templates, but Slides Carnival and Slides Go are free. And Fiverr, if you want to pay a little bit for some kind of other options, it's up to you. But I'm a big fan of slide templates, and I've paid for some over the years and kind of curated my favorites. So if you ever are looking for some, if you click on that link there for Dropbox, it just brings you to my kind of personal folder of PowerPoint templates. The nice thing about Slides Carnival and Slides Go, they have the Google template equivalents for everything as well. So this is a good way to kind of just make things clean and not think too hard about it and just plug and drop things in, and then your presentations look really nice. Okay, another strategy is I mentioned this earlier, you want to reduce the text as much as possible. So I'm going to give you 2 examples here. So which one's better? Social media use is associated with an increase in reported depression, anxiety, and burnout, as well as a decrease in self-esteem and happiness, or this picture. Any comments? Which one's better? Okay, so I think we can agree it's B. Yes, exactly. So that is definitely easier to interpret, and people can look at it quickly and get all the same information they would have gotten from 2 lines of text in about a fraction of the time. Okay, the next option, we have une échantillon de 250 étudiants canadiens ont participé à l'étude, and then versus 250 étudiants canadiens. So there's lots of little tricks. Kind of keywords, if you want ideas for this, are pictograms. Is just kind of the way to find ways to illustrate, I guess, visually illustrate things that you would normally have to write out. I don't know if anyone else has other tricks for this. Nope. Okay. All right. So next tip is use animations to guide the audience. So this is just some slide. I just copy and pasted some slides from something that I'd done before, but this was related to some of my PhD work. So it's not really so important what's on the slides, but I just wanted to show you how you can use the tracking animations in PowerPoint to really kind of convey and get people to follow along with what you're saying. So if you want to, here you're operationalizing things, and then you can just click through it, Jen.
Okay.
And then you can see like, okay, so just using the animations, you can introduce other things. We can talk about how this predicts it, and then that's an outcome. And then we can show this whole model, and you can time the animation so they go along with what you're saying. And this is, there's lots of tutorials online on how to do this kind of stuff. But you don't even need to make things move. Just by timing when things appear, you can really help your audience follow along with what you're seeing and what you're doing in like a really kind of productive way. And that helps them understand. So. All right, so this one's important. Use color palettes. So if you want your slides to look like the University of Ottawa, you can go to the University of Ottawa branding website and get their exact colors. But I don't know. I never bother. I don't know if anyone has strong feelings. I usually just put the logo and it's like enough. But if you want kind of the high quality versions of the logo, if you want to know the fonts the university uses, if you want some of their templates, the branding website's actually pretty neat to go look at, and you can kind of see all their rules. Obviously, you're not going to follow all their guidelines. Like they're like, oh, the university logo cannot have anything near it. It must be exactly this color and this size and whatever. I wouldn't worry about it for your slides, but it's interesting to see kind of what they offer. But if you're not sure about colors and like what goes nice and how to kind of decide and like not to overwhelm people, or you want it to look pretty, you can go to like coolers.co there, and that will generate color palettes that go together and also highlight kind of which ones are popular right now. So if you wanted your slides to look a certain way, but increasingly there's a call to make slides accessible. So I would actually recommend that you check your colors to make sure that they're kind of safe for anyone with visual impairments or who's colorblind. And I admit this is something I don't do enough of, but I'm going to start doing more of, to just make sure that your colors are like safe for everyone, I guess. I don't know if anyone has anything to add. So those 2 websites there will let you look for kind of, I guess, friendly colors. What is asking? She's asking, how do you do that? What do you mean, Liza? Yeah, so I'm not colorblind, but apparently if you go to those sites, they'll show you which ones contrast enough so that anyone with a visual impairment will still see it. Because I think if you put red on green or certain colors, if you're colorblind, you can't see the contrast.
Red, green,
so it looks
brown,
all the same.
I think.
Yeah. So depending in certain shades, and it's funny because it doesn't take much. It's like a slightly different shade, and suddenly it looks like a totally different color to someone with a visual impairment than it doesn't. And so anyway, it's a good way to make sure that you haven't inadvertently done that. Okay. And then next we have, what do I have here? Oh yes, follow basic design principles. So this is something that the PowerPoint templates and Google Slide templates, they'll try to set you up to follow this, but it's pretty easy to not to kind of let things let things get a bit wonky. But we'll just go through some kind of basic ways to put things on your slides to make sure that they're clear. So you can use, you want to draw, you can use different kind of techniques to make things bigger or smaller to draw people's attention on a slide. But you want to make sure that the things that are kind of have that are drawing or bigger are the things you want people to pay attention to first. And so that would be kind of like your headings or other kind of key titles throughout your presentation, so that's where people kind of target first, and then they can see the other stuff. You want to make sure that your things are balanced. So, if you have 2 images that are very similar size next to each other, you want to try to resize them or edit them so that they are exactly the same size. Because it being slightly off can be distracting for some people and just won't have that same kind of crisp look. Whereas if you have things that are different sizes, you can either kind of embrace it and go for that asymmetrical, or you want to make sure they're perfect. But kind of anything in between, it's a little hard on the eyes. You can lump things that are similar together so that people know those are related and can kind of just glaze over it again. Next, you want to make sure that, whoops, keep going, yeah.
Proximity? Is that?
Did I not cover? Oh yeah, so that's keeping things that are related together. Sorry, that was proximity. So then contrast. So you can make things kind of like feel like they're closer. So things that are dark feel closer, and things that are light feel further away. So if you want to highlight one thing, you can make it one color, and if this is the presentation, and then you can switch them while you talk about the other thing. So you can make things feel like they're coming towards you or more important by changing the color on them. So if you had let's say you had 2 boxes that had some information in them, and you were going to talk about both of them, while you're talking about the first one, you can make it darker and then the other one lighter, and then switch them. And it'll actually make people kind of feel that contrast and feel that the importance is shifted. You can use white space, especially if you really want to highlight something important. So if you want to have all the focus in one spot, don't be afraid of having a pretty naked slide. It's okay. You don't want to have completely naked ones, but having one here or there it can really give a good impact. And then this one. So make sure you're consistent with your alignment, and especially in a poster, because it ends up getting printed and it's really obvious if things are off. But there's tools now in PowerPoint that make this pretty easy to check. So that's definitely recommended. And then, this idea of kind of having repetition. So making sure, you use the same fonts, the same sizes, the same different things throughout your presentation, so it's coherent. And if you introduce a concept early on and there's a logo, carry that logo throughout, or keep things consistent so that when people are watching, they're like, oh, I've seen this before, and can, relate back to it. So I think that covers that. Any questions or comments here?
I have a question, Meredith, before we get into resources.
Yes.
And it's jumping back a little bit, but I didn't want to get too far ahead of myself until we looked at all the practical tips.
Yes.
So earlier on in the presentation, when you were talking about the different sections, you had title, context, methods, results, discussion, and I'm missing one, acknowledgements. So
Yes.
my question is, does that mean that my presentation should only have 6 slides, one for each
No, it
section?
shouldn't. Sorry. That's a great point. So general rule of thumb is about 1 slide per minute. So you will have certain sections that have more slides. And it's not, if you're fast on slides, it's don't worry about, like if you can have 1 slide that just takes you 2 seconds as you say a question and then move on. So, but generally speaking, you don't need, you could only have 6 slides, but you could have 20 slides. But a good rule of thumb is 1 slide per minute of your presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we've put together some resources for you to have examples. Okay, so the first one is a folder, which we will share with you, and we'll go explore that folder now. And then otherwise, these are just some videos on different PowerPoint tutorials if you want to get better at PowerPoint. So I don't know, like this is again, it's like a passion project of mine. So I love PowerPoint, but I get that some people might not. But if you want to get better at PowerPoint, I would highly recommend checking out the video, especially that 30 tips one, because it basically covers how to do everything. Like if you wanted to edit an image, if you want to like make a really cool figure, if you wanted to do a really neat animation, it's probably in there. So if you, and you don't have to watch the whole thing, you could just scan through it. But now we'll go to this example folder and we'll share this with you. So I don't know how we'll see it.
Yeah, it might not be sharing just yet.
Okay.
I just need to switch the screen share. Hang on.
Oh, now I can see myself. Oh yeah, I can see how it would have. Oh yeah, sorry guys.
Okay.
Okay.
So
On a 4 fichiers. Alors, le premier, c'est toutes les thèses de spec de l'école de psychologie à l'Université d'Ottawa de l'année passée. Et la raison que j'ai inclus ça, c'est parce que it's like a gold mine. Alors, l'année passée, la conférence a eu lieu en ligne à la dernière minute à cause du COVID-19. Alors, on a ici, je crois que c'est comme 70 exemples d'affiches qui étaient supposées d'être imprimées, que finalement n'ont pas été et ils ont juste partagé des PDF en ligne. Mais comme vous pouvez voir, il y a plein d'exemples, mais souvent, ils suivent le même comme format que je vous ai montré avec soit les 3 colonnes ou on voit des cases, comme vous voyez ici. Et aussi, il y a 4 exemples de présentations orales. Alors, et vous allez voir ici que, peut-être, I'm contradicting myself, mais ils n'ont pas tout inclus dans leur page titre, toutes les informations autour de la conférence. But you can see some examples here of different academic presentations, and these ones are 10-minute presentations. So if you're looking for examples, inspiration, that's a lot of posters. OK, ensuite, on a oral presentations. Alors, malheureusement, les seuls exemples que j'avais, c'est des présentations que j'ai données. Alors, je vous ai donné ici, j'ai des présentations de 30 minutes, 10 minutes et une présentation qui couvre une proposition. Alors, vous allez voir que ça suit le modèle que je vous ai montré et vous pouvez voir un peu comment que j'ai présenté les résultats et les diapos. And then there's posters. Alors, these are different posters that either I've made or the one on the end, a colleague let me share. So you can see those. And then the last one is the actual folders to make the posters. So if you want to see what it looks like in PowerPoint and play around, you can just download those and edit them yourself. So yeah. So that covers, hopefully that gave you some practical tips of some kind. And then otherwise, we will pitch our next session, which is on how to build an academic CV website and talking about industry and academic CVs. So if you're thinking of staying in research or leaving and going out and applying for jobs and aren't sure how to put your master's or PhD or research experience on your CV in a way that really highlights your expertise, we'll be covering that. So that's next month. And otherwise, that is it.
And we'll be
Okay.
sharing the video and the